Hi, I'm Paul Johnson with the Optimistic American. I'm here today with my guest, Dr. Emily Bashah. We've been bombarded by lots of questions from people who are concerned about a rising recession, a bad economy, and how it is that they can navigate their way through it. Today, we're going to give you some tools to be able to deal with that, including thinking about this dark passenger that exists inside of all of us. Also, how it is that we get to make the choices and how to navigate difficult conversations. We also are going to talk about the hierarchy of agency, which you can find on our website, www.optimisticamerican.com. Now, if you like what it is that you hear here today, we hope that you'll subscribe on YouTube or on other channels just to help us continue our work. It doesn't cost you anything. We're not going to send you a bunch of crazy ads. We're just doing it to try to make certain that we can continue our work. Thanks again, and now on with the show. Dr. Bashah, welcome to the Optimistic American.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, so today we're going to talk about what we've seen from a lot of our guests, which is a high level of angst about what's going on inside our national economy. There's little doubt, I think, that we're heading towards at least some type of downturn or possibly a recession. The Federal Reserve's made a decision to raise interest rates, and there's just no doubt that raising interest rates is designed to slow the economy. That makes them concerned about whether or not they should start a business or whether or not they should get married or whether or not they should have children. I mean, there are a lot of things that raises questions about. And what I'm hoping to do is that we can talk about how it is that you navigate through that. You're a psychologist, so you can give us some input on how to actually navigate through it from a psychological standpoint. I'm just older, so I get to, I've been through quite a few of these, so I can tell people what I've seen from my past and how it is that they can navigate it. But what I want to start with is what I think is the biggest part of the problem, which is this whole concept of a dark passenger. Now, the dark passenger, many people will recognize that from a series that was done on television about a man named Dexter, who was actually a individual, serial killer. And he would talk about having this dark passenger that would talk him into doing these terrible things.
Kind of a classic psychopath.
Right. But there's actually a psychological definition to the dark passenger. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was originally developed to describe major depression, major depressive disorder that people may carry. And there's a lot of stigma around mental illness and mental health problems that people don't necessarily feel that they can confide in others about having some of these darker, disturbing thoughts or suicidal ideation or just this hopelessness or helplessness and feeling run down and ragged and maybe having thoughts of worthlessness. And so people will carry that with them and not feel safe to be able to share it with trusted loved ones. And so sometimes they'll describe, even when I do share it, I feel shamed and blamed because of it, because I'm told, well, I just need to exercise more, or I just need to take medication, or I just need to see a therapist, or I just need to pray more, or practice spirituality, and that should fix it all. But the problem is it's not really validating the experience that the person is having. It's really kind of saying, well, you're just not working hard enough to be happier. And it's your fault that you're continuing to be depressed, that you should just be able to shift and be more optimistic. And it doesn't necessarily work that way for people in different periods of time, depending on what's going on with their lives. There's a lot of things that happen outside of our control that, through no fault of our own, are unjust and put us in positions. We talked about my family story with my grandfather being abducted by the government, disappearing.
By the way, not the American government, but the
Iraqi government. Yes. Yeah, for those who are not hearing, who are just now tuning in. So my parents being minorities, religious minorities, Jews in Iraq at the time of the Ba'ath Party, with the rise of Saddam Hussein gaining more power, my grandfather was targeted, and as Jews all over the country were targeted.
It was a horrific period.
Yeah, as well as other religious minorities who were also being targeted. So it was a horrific time, and absolutely, but they went into survival mode. So through no fault of their own, there were unjust circumstances. And so how is somebody supposed to tolerate that? How is somebody supposed to just feel optimistic about life, or feel hopeful about life? And it's a transformation that can be a lifelong struggle. And I see that with the people that I work with, that we can vacillate. We can, psychologists can teach skills. People can learn coping skills. But it doesn't mean that they can just expect to be in that place. They have to constantly be working at it. And life will constantly challenge us. And I tell that all the time to my clients. You feel like, I'm so proud of you. You've got this now, and you've made tremendous growth. Now the real test is if you're going to be able to maintain it and really show that you're able to apply these skills, because the next crisis will come. It'll come at some point in our lives.
So, and I'm interested in your comment on this. I imagine that there are different levels of weight that the dark passenger can have in someone's life. Sometimes it can be, for some people, overpowering and very difficult to overcome. For other people, they're there, they see them, they're experiencing depression, but maybe they have more control over it. I look at this whole concept of the dark passenger, and I apply it to what's happening in society today. Arguably, not arguably, I think it's almost inarguable, we're going through a period of enlightenment. Steven Pinker was on our show last week, who did a great job of describing his book called Enlightenment Now. But the Enlightenment is about the age of rationality, how we use rationality and science, optimism, and liberal democracy. Liberal meaning that we work under the rule of law, we have free elections, but that we both entitle people to personal freedoms as well as economic freedoms. That all of those things are interconnected. That through that we've created an incredible advancement for the human race. We've dramatically reduced poverty throughout the world. We've dramatically increased literacy. We've dramatically decreased child immortality. In the United States, we've done more to be able to promote trade and free markets and to advance not only the human condition, but actually advance our own economics. Now, that may be hard to see if you're only looking back 5 years or 6 years, but if you look back 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, you will see that there's been a steady march towards growth. Yet that whole concept of enlightenment, back in the 1880s, there was a kind of a revolution against the positive forces that were going on in the world. And they created this movement that in English translated to the end of the century. And this whole movement that was about the end of the century was designed to say, hey, all these things don't work. We shouldn't be talking about rationality. We should be talking about how we feel. And how we feel isn't good. And people believed that pessimism was actually more important than optimism, or at least this movement believed that. And they certainly didn't believe in democratic values. Now, that came to a head in the 1930s when in 1929 the stock market crashed, and all of a sudden we started getting these isms, communism and fascism, and those movements began to blossom all around the world, right? The Ba'ath Party that ended up having horrendous effects on your family was a strain of that whole movement that took place. Today, we have the Enlightenment. There are people like Steven Pinker talking about the Enlightenment. But you can also find that there are people talking about the Dark Enlightenment. People who, again, believe in a very pessimistic view of the world, who believe that democracy isn't working, who ignore the benefits that we've gained from it. They've taken a very dark look at society. And what they really want is they have some issue that's bothering them where they're in the minority, and they believe the only way they're going to be able to get it is to overthrow democratic means. Now, that's not just an issue in Western democracy. That's an issue taking place all over the world. This struggle between authoritarians and people having agency. And in the United States, if we don't have agency, if we don't have the belief that we have some control over our own destiny and the understanding of the role that we play as citizens to promote it, then our Western liberal democracy will fail. Because at the end of the day, it depends upon us as individuals not only to be concerned about what rights we have, but what obligations that we have back. What I see is that there are a lot of people who have that dark passenger, who believe all those negative, pessimistic things, and it's overpowering to them in their ability to make decisions to move forward on starting a business or growing their business, or decisions on how they might actually adjust their business to make it work, whether they're professionals or investors or people who are in business or people who are trying to start a business or even people who are thinking about getting married and having children. That dark passenger sitting there becomes this thing that tells them maybe they shouldn't do it. From everything that I see, it's incorrect. This is a period of great enlightenment, but it is a choice. Whether you decide to buy into that dark enlightenment or the enlightenment, that's your choice.
So looking at people who are more pessimistic and subscribing to that dark enlightenment ideology, I see them as angry, rageful, but they're motivated. And they have a momentum that they're building upon. And I think, wow, like that's a powerful force that could be used for good. Oftentimes with a dark passenger, you see that this belief system becomes more internalized. They're more self-critical. They're blaming themselves. They feel more helpless and pessimistic, but they don't necessarily feel mobilized or action-oriented. So there is this different sense or element that I think can differentiate somebody who's really suffering from depression versus, somebody who's rageful and angry and tired of feeling oppressed and tired of feeling marginalized. And they're really directing their energy outward. It's more about blaming who's the person that I could point my finger at. It's that white man on top. And, they just need somebody to identify as the villain so they can use that energy and that rage and the momentum to build something. That can be really, really powerful if it's redirected, or if that energy is focused on something towards creativity or innovation or mobilization, social mobilization. I inherently believe, and this is my philosophy as a psychologist, is that people are doing the best they can with the skills and the tools and the transformation, their spiritual transformation that they have and where they are right now. It's my job to get them to that next stage. And it's uncomfortable. One of the things I like to do is, or the way I think about it, is to really hold up a mirror. In order to do that, I really have to align with that person to ensure that they trust me, to ensure that they feel safe in the therapy session. If they're coming in and just putting on a front for me, it's not going to work. And sometimes clients who are mandated do that. There's this constant resistance. Even if they're coming in on their own choice, it can be hard because sometimes the motivation is, well, I just want to satisfy my wife or I want to satisfy my husband. And so it's not really an internal motivation. If they're really there because they're willing to do the work, those are the clients who I see the most effectiveness for therapeutic change because they're open. And really, it's not about trusting me. It's about trusting themselves.
So it partly comes down to them choosing to want it. If they choose to want it, it's very different than if you have somebody that's maybe been assigned to you because something's happened in their job and they're kind of forced to go and talk to you. I
have a great example, if I can. It might segue a little bit, but I have a great example. We were on a family trip this weekend, and there was a family member who was really frustrated with another family member, and they were complaining, saying, oh, they constantly make everything about them, and they're always the victim in the situation, and they're manipulating the situation just to get all the attention, and they're just such an attention seeker, and I'm just so frustrated with them. And so I started asking some questions like, oh, well, how did that affect your holiday? What did you do differently, or how did you manage those situations? But eventually the conversation really just remained on, I'm so frustrated that person always victimizes themselves. And so it like forced me to ask the question, is that something that you also do? And I said, I've seen times in my life I've done that. I think that,
by the way, that's making it safe.
Yeah, by me sharing my own vulnerability and openness, can also offer that validation for others to open as well. Because I'm not saying that I'm perfect, nor am I criticizing or blaming, but it's an opening. Mm-hmm. It's an opportunity for us to look at ourselves. It is so easy to just put the responsibility outside of ourselves and externalize the blame. And I see it all the time, especially in the forensic work that I do, in the clinical work that I do. But really what that's telling me is this person is not in a position or a place where they're able to practice that self-agency and empower themselves to see how are they contributing to this.
And I find, one of the books that I know that both of us have read, and I spent some significant time on it in a program with General Wesley Clark calling Restore America, is the book Crucial Conversations. The piece that I pull out of that is not only the individual in the family that you were talking to that maybe wasn't seeing their own role in it, but more importantly, that before you were able to get them to that, you had to make it safe. Right? We can't have conversations with people, not constructive conversations, where people don't feel safe to have them. And when we're talking at one another, and we've kind of set ourselves in our own ideology, or we set ourselves in our own belief system, and we don't want to listen to their belief system, and also to show some vulnerability in the process, it's very difficult to get them to open up and to tell you how they really see it.
Yeah, otherwise she would have just acted defensive towards me because now she's having to protect her own self and self-interest and ego defensiveness, and all those other cognitive distortions might become amplified if she's responding in a defensive way, if she's perceiving me as being attacking. Even if I'm not seeing myself as being attacking, if it's just the fact that she's perceiving me as being attacking, mm-hmm. then that would promote defensiveness. So what I said was, oh, that's interesting. You're pointing out how this person identifies as a victim and even promotes that victim stance in order to gain attention. Is that something that you do? And that could be a really confrontational question. Because what I'm saying is, yeah, I could spend the whole hour in the car with you talking about how this person is a horrible person and how they do all these horrible things and how did they get that way, and that could be safe. But really, how are you growing from that? We're not, no. But if we can see it for ourselves, well, yeah, she agreed. She said, well, yeah, I do that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gives you a chance for growth. And that takes me to that all of us, regardless of, at least in my opinion, regardless of where we are on the scale with that dark passenger sitting next to us, meaning they're a predominant force in our life, where they're just there every now and then, that kind of gets us. I feel like I have every now and then the dark passenger sitting next to me that can make me depressed and stressed and worried, and that can begin to make me think that maybe things aren't going to work out. And that in itself can be depressing, especially with me. I know I've always been very ambitious, so I'm always worried about, am I going as far as I want to go? Am I getting to the place that I want to get to? Of course, that has its implications also, because sometimes I forget about the things that are really the most important to me because of ambition. But we choose, right? We choose what we want to focus on, right? We can decide, that you're going to focus on the beginning of your marriage or the end of your marriage, or the end of your marriage being a new beginning in your marriage. We decide what to focus on. Then we decide how to interpret it, right? How are we going to see what it is that we're focusing on. And last, we get to choose how are we going to respond to it. But the more that dark passenger is in control of our life, the more it's in control of our ideology, in control of our view of other people, the more it's in control of our whole outlook on life, the harder it is to believe that you're in control. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we want to promote change, and people will defend against feeling powerlessness or loss or lack of control. And so even in prison, we talked about this before, even when all your rights are being stripped from you, even when, in talking about the bath party, your rights are being taken away from you because of the government. Even in those situations, that there's still some power of change that you can affect to promote your safety, to promote your survival, to secure your family. Even in those moments, and I see that with people who are in prison, they still feel hopeful. Even with all the losses, they didn't get to attend their mother's funeral. They didn't get to see their family members before they died.
By the way, you don't mean all members of people who are in prison. You just meet people in prison who are that way.
Yeah. So through doing forensic evaluations, I have the opportunity to do
It's
evaluations.
good for people to know that you're not an ex-con.
Oh, yeah. I guess that would be helpful. No. I'm fortunate for the profession that I get to do. Although I do acknowledge that sometimes I feel like there's very little that differentiates me from them. I think, if I feel very fortunate for my life. I feel very fortunate for the opportunities that I've had in my life. I feel very fortunate for the people who love me and who have loved me and supported me and encouraged me.
I think that comes down to I really do believe that that we end up where we are from 1,000 decisions. And if you have a very successful life, you made 1,000 very right decisions with very few wrong ones. If you have an incredibly failed life, you made 1,000 bad decisions, and all of them stack on top of one another. One of the things that I found interesting, again, on the book on Crucial Conversations, was just this whole concept of having a conversation, and that there's this moment in a conversation where you're making a decision on how you're going to react. And that one moment really is the trigger for whether or not you're going to be successful at that moment or a failure at that moment. So the idea is that we tell a story to ourselves. And it's very easy to tell ourselves a story that says, hey, I'm a victim in this situation. The other person is a villain, and it's hopeless. There's nothing that I'm going to be able to do to fix it. Well, when someone is confronting you with that, you're going to have a very different response with that set of beliefs in your mind than you're going to if you have a differing outlook. I've seen in my life that come into play a number of times. I had an individual on a job site not too long ago where I was going out to try to help my brother and my son who were dealing with a subcontractor. The subcontractor hadn't shown up in months, in weeks. They had left their equipment out on the site. They weren't getting the work done that they needed to get done. They were partway through the job, so it was impossible to replace them. And finally, they showed. So when they showed, I made some snide comment like, well, it's nice to see that you showed up today, which they blew up on. They got upset. They started yelling. They told me they were going to charge me for their equipment being sitting on the site. All these incendiary things. Now, I looked at him, pretty big burly guy, and I realized he'd been working hard that day. His face not only was covered with sweat, but the dirt from the site had begun to stick to it. He had an old pickup truck. This was a guy who was working really hard to be able to make it. And so I said, okay, I'm going to take a different approach. The approach was, I said, you know what? I'm sorry. All right. I'm thinking about my job site, what it was that I need to get done. It's obvious. You're a hard worker. You're out here trying to put it together. This site isn't working for you. It's hard for you to be able to get to the job. Maybe we can find some alternative.
So I just want to pause you right there. So what you did in that moment with the crucial conversation is you diffused him being defensive and angry at you, rather than somebody there who's pointing a finger at him and blaming him for being late, not getting the job done, all these other things. You were able to align with him and diffuse those ego defenses so that he was less likely.
Find mutual purpose. Find a common ground. Help him understand that I understand where he's coming from. And then I started giving him options.
It's a de-escalation technique too.
Maybe we can find a way to pay you for what you have and let you move on. Well, it was a kind of a tough moment because he broke down and started crying. And he began to tell me about his mother who had died of COVID. And she had died of COVID in his mind because he had given her the advice not to take the vaccine. And so he was blaming himself. And then that made him angry. And because he'd been angry, he hadn't been good to his wife. And then that ended up relating to her leaving him that week earlier when he didn't show up on the job. And he was out trying to deal with that problem. Now, in like 2 moments, both of us were, I had tears in my eyes. I emotionally connected to him. And I couldn't help but ask, okay, how do I help you? How can I help you? And he said, Paul, I promise you I will focus on this job and get it done, and I'll stay here until it's done, which is really what I wanted in the first place.
Yeah, and
right?
you were able to find that common ground, like you said, together.
But I started the conversation with, it's nice that you could show up, which was taking us in a completely opposite direction of what it was that I really wanted, right?
Yeah.
Which was a fight.
Yes.
Right? I wanted the job done. That's what I was after. The key...
And to show that you were disappointed.
Yeah. But the key is you can't avoid those conversations. That conversation needed to happen, right? And we needed to build the trust between us. And I needed to be able to know that he was going to get the job done. And he needed to know that I cared about him. But finding that way to defuse it, to make it safe, to find mutual purpose, and then also to make certain that I'm allowing a connection to take place between us. Overwhelmingly, I have found, now that was just one subcontractor. I have found this over and over again. When you can find that connection, it is amazing the things that you can accomplish.
And with the forensic work I do, you could have been that one final straw that broke the camel's back in that moment, right? He could have had a gun in his car. He could have, been like, that's it. Like, I'm out. I've got nothing to live for, and I don't care who I'm taking with me. And maybe it sounds extreme for me to be saying this, but honestly, with the work that I do, that's often how it happens. It's just that one more thing that adds on top of all this compounded trauma and stressors and loss, and feeling defeated, that people don't have anything left to live for. But now you've got somebody that believes in you, somebody that's listening to you, somebody that's showing compassion for you. It's hard to be that rageful and violent in that moment when somebody sees you and hears you and experiences you and validates you. And I think, there's a lot of words around, like people are putting on their bumper sticker, like, be kind. I think it's a wonderful slogan, yeah, but how do we really practice that? How do we really allow ourselves to show that we care about other people? And, we don't know what we're preventing, right? That person could have had all kinds of other plans for their day.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a question because I will say you're about the best in this that I know. And this is going to tell our audience maybe a little more than we've let them know in the past.
It's a revealing of the dark passenger.
There you go. Maybe you're the dark passenger, as Doc Holliday once said. But in any event, so you and I had a moment, and it was during the Christmas holidays, or the Hanukkah holidays. From your standpoint, the Christmas holiday, from my standpoint. And we had gone to 4 of your family events. We had taken your mom and dad to 2 different places, which I love your mom and dad. I enjoyed taking them to those locations. We then had your brother come up to our cabin. I loved having them there. And then we had one of your friends come up to the cabin. So it was it was beautiful. Well, then I went to see my one son who's in New York going to college at Columbia, and he said, well, I can't go to that. Then I had another one where I was bringing my son up to the cabin, and you said, oh, I can't make that. And then I had some third event that I wanted you to go to, and you couldn't go to that. And I was really getting frustrated. So I decided, hey, you push me as you do to say, come on, what's wrong? I know that there's something wrong. And finally I said, okay, I'll tell you what's wrong. We did 4 of your family events. I went to all of them. I was there. It was a great time. I enjoyed it. So I'm not trying to take away from it, but we've had 3 of my family deals and you haven't gone to any of them. And you put on that big smile, you threw your arms around my neck and you said, oh, you missed me. Right. And I didn't know quite how to react to it. It was like, but it was perfect, right?
It was an endearing moment for me.
You could have easily have looked at it as, hey, we have a little girl, I'm working, we have all these other things, and you could have been defensive, and it could have turned into an argument, right?
Yeah, blaming each other.
You're very good at finding that way in that crucial moment to express joy and to understand where the other side is coming from as opposed to frustration. And I don't really know how you do it.
Oh, I listen to subtext. What is he really saying? Yes, he wants me to go to these events. And I was thinking back on it. I could have got defensive. Yeah, I had all this work to do. We have the baby, all these other things. But you had a valid point. Yeah, you're absolutely valid. You're right. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily fair to you that I wasn't joining you, and you were making all this effort to join my family, and I wasn't making as much effort to merge and join yours. But in addition to that, what I heard was, I missed you. I wanted you there with me. I wanted you to be going with me to these places and participating in these family events.
I'm sure I didn't say that, but I did think it.
And that's vulnerability, right? To be able to say to somebody, I really wanted you there. And I know for you, you were such a proponent of independence and autonomy and agency. You live it, and nor do you ever want to impose what you want onto another person. That would prevent you from saying to me, like, hey, I'd really love for you to come. I miss you when you're not there. Because in your mind, you're interpreting that as persuading me to do something that I might not want to do. And that's something you wouldn't want to do.
Yeah, I hate to convince people to do things that they don't want to do, even if I want them to.
But as your companion, I also want to hear, I missed you. I wanted you there. And that's what I heard you say. And that was the subtext of what was underneath it all. And I think, that is a beautiful example of intimacy, caring, communication, really knowing your partner, listening to your partner.
You also gave me the benefit of a doubt, right? You started in your mind with the mindset of not being a victim, not making me the villain, and not seeing yourself as helpless. Right, you created a story in your mind up front that gave me the benefit of a doubt. When you stop giving people the benefit of a doubt in your mind, those conversations are going to go bad. They're just going to go bad. And I think we've lost giving the benefit of a doubt, not just to somebody that we know and that we've become experienced with, and maybe there's a good reason for us not to give them the benefit of a doubt. We don't give people the benefit of a doubt when we're driving to work. People in another car that we don't even know, right? It's
easier to dehumanize them if you don't see them and they don't see you.
But by trying to give other people the benefit of a doubt and realize, hey, maybe they've got tough things going on and I'm not paying attention to it, and maybe I should be joyful for the fact that I don't have all those things and I don't need to engage in the same type of activity. It's the way that we react and the way that people see us begins to create how others treat us. We talked about this. In fact, I spoke about this with this individual who was the subcontractor. I asked him how he was dealing with the breakup with his wife, and he was telling me, he wanted her back, and he was writing her notes, and he was sending her flowers, and she was mad at him over the notes that he was sending, and she wanted him to leave him alone, right? And he just didn't understand where she was coming from. And my comment to him was, I said, look, when you two got together, was it a good thing? He said, it was best time of my life. And he said, I think the best time of hers. I said, she saw you as being attractive, right? You were confident. You believed in yourself. You were joyful. You were happy. Is that the person you are today? Right? You know, my guess is from what you're telling me about the letters, you're desperate. You're upset.
Yeah.
You look
Less
like you're
attractive.
needy. You maybe been angry before that because of all that's going on in the economy. All those things make you less attractive, not more attractive. It's not what she was attracted to in the beginning, nor was it the things that you were attracted to in her in the beginning. Thinking about how are you going to become the person that you were, right? The role that you play in that's going to have a much bigger impact on the relationship than simply trying to do all that you can do to get them back. Right? Sometimes you have to do the work on yourself first.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, even with people who tend to be very critical of others, by the time they get to me in therapy, what I'll usually say is, wow, you know, I just hear you criticizing others so much. I can only imagine how critical you are of yourself, because inevitably that's what's really driving it. A couple different techniques that I use for myself and in therapy that could be helpful is I like to see how other people experience me. So sometimes I will put myself in the position or in the role of a family member and think about, you know, if I were to be enacting them, how would I see my behaviors and who I am in our relationship? And oftentimes that leaves me feeling somewhat guilty, like, oh, I'm not doing enough, or, you know, I probably came across as self-absorbed or dismissive of them in a situation, and I didn't like the way that felt. Let me go back and correct that. And another technique that I'll do, which I find also helpful, is what are they really saying? So sometimes, you know, we tell ourselves the story in our head of what this person is wanting, and it can aggravate us or get us frustrated or irritated with this other person. But when you like deduce it down to the core elements, what does this person really want? What are they really saying? What is really going on for them? You can break down some of that other superficial stuff that we can get lost in. And you might find yourself feeling more compassionate for that person or the situation, or really even trying to understand them a bit better.
Okay, Emily. So let's talk about, we've done a lot of work in the Optimistic American with you, thinking about what we call the hierarchy of agency, the keys or the steps to being able to regain your own agency, which, again, people can find on our website at theoptimisticamerican.com. They can find it under a drop-down tab called Hierarchy of Agency. There are 4 of those items that I'd like to cover today. I don't want to cover all 7, nor do I want to cover all the details of them, but the 4 that I'd like to do is know the truth, be accountable to yourself, finding meaning, and we, not me. And I'd like to cover those 4. So let's start with just the whole idea of know the truth. You know, this, again, is where the dark passenger fits in. Oftentimes, people don't see it as it really is. They look at a situation and they begin to believe that that things, as they look down the road, they think it is inevitable that things will get worse. And they not only do that in their own personal life, but they may start with the country and the world and economics and a possible recession and the effects that can have on them, and then the effects that could have on them and their family and their life. And all of that begins to take them down a road where they begin to almost have an apocalyptic vision of what it is that's going to happen, which stresses them out even more and makes them react even worse to existing situations. To me, one of the very first steps of knowing the truth is to see it as it really is.
Yeah, and that can be hard to do. Like, what is the truth? You know, sometimes it could be so ethereal and really hard to label in concrete terms. And especially if somebody is engaging in some of these like catastrophizing or we talked about cognitive behavioral therapy and some of these cognitive distortions people engage in, like all or nothing, black or white thinking, sometimes magnifying the problem or minimizing possible solutions. And so we have these distorted perceptions. But when you're in it, it's almost like this illusion. It's hard to know what the truth really is. And especially when the emotions become so hyperactive, we feel this strongly about something, so then it must be true. And it could be really challenging because it could cause us to feel a little bit of this confusion, maybe some of this self-doubt, unsure of what the reality really is. And so a couple of the things that popped up for me as you were talking is anticipatory anxiety. You had talked about this destabilization in the economy, people feeling maybe less certain or secure about their future. That's going to have a lot of ripple effects on some of the decisions that they're making about their businesses or family planning or other things. But when people propel themselves into the future, we call that anticipatory anxiety. And that's really where they're starting to feel distressed. Catastrophizing might be one of those cognitive distortions that they engage in. People who tend to be more on the depressive end tend to be more pessimistic, but they're also trapped in the past. They're depressed or they're feeling hopeless or a sense of loss because of things that have happened to them. And they're really stuck in that mindset because they haven't really found that kind of resolution for them to be able to move forward. And people can have both, right? They can vacillate between the past and the future. But it's taking them away from being in the present moment and really being grounded. And you can't change what happened in the past. You can change the way you think about the past. And that's what we see in trauma-informed treatment, is reprocessing what we're telling ourselves. But we can try and prepare for what's coming in the future. But honestly, I tell my clients this all the time. By the time you've gone through all the different iterations of things that you're preparing for as worst case scenarios and things that could happen, by the time you get to the next couple stages, it's going to be a whole nother set of problems that are going to be presented to you. So while you're preparing over here for all these other wars that are about to come up in front of you, it's just going to evolve into something different. So why waste your energy? Honestly, you can anticipate and get information, feel informed, prepare yourself, do those things to feel secure. I think that's really important. But ultimately come back to the present and give yourself that perspective to affect what it is that you can really affect change in. It's in the here and now.
Yeah, and I do think that this is an area where, we used to watch the news once a night. We'd hear from our political candidates 2 months before a campaign. We'd hear from the political parties maybe 1 month before the political campaign. We've moved to this stage where everything is on a breaking news cycle. It's 24-hour news with breaking news every moment, almost all negative. There's nothing positive. Candidates, almost completely negative about the other side and the damage that they're going to do to the country. The parties are completely negative. And it's creating this insecurity from people from what feels like these huge tectonic plates that are below them that are shifting, where the ground is moving and they don't know what's going to happen in the future. This is not the optimist show. This is the optimistic show. An optimist maybe can be Pollyannish, maybe, right? But being optimistic just simply believes that we can fix the problems. There are problems that exist, but we can fix them. It also means, we're the optimistic American as a show, because there's no doubt in my mind this country is the greatest superpower this planet has ever seen, and we are going to own this next century. We're going to have challenges. We're going to have challenges from Russia. We're going to have challenges from China. We're going to have recessions. Recessions, by the way, kind of have to happen. If they didn't, you end up with depressions. There's always a leveling out that happens in the economy. But overwhelmingly, this is still the best place to be at the greatest time to be here. And if you can start with at least a belief of that, I think that it begins to help you address some of the other issues. I think a large portion of the angst that we're seeing and the stress that we're seeing and the road rage that we're seeing is coming from people being unsure about what's happening on a national basis because they're being fed that 24/7. Now, why do I believe that? Look, when I was mayor, no one talked about politics. Believe me, I knocked on doors. I went and met people. It was with rarity that people would talk about politics. We talk about politics all the time now. And guess what? Politics is the place where we go to work out our problems. So, of course, there's stress there. But overwhelmingly, we're in a very good position here. Now, the second thing I think that you have to do is not only to see it as it is, but you do have to tell the truth. Right. And especially you have to tell the truth as it relates to the situation that you're in. So as an example, is a recession going to happen? Most likely. Why? Well, the feds are raising interest rates. Why are they raising interest rates? Slow the economy down because they're trying to cure inflation. Now, I tend to line that up with I'm not God. All right. I'm just a surfer. Right. God makes the waves. But if I'm really a good surfer, I can figure out how to hang 10 on this next wave and be able to ride it. People make money in bad markets all the time. They make money. In fact, one of my favorites is John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller once said, well, how did you make all the money that you make? Because he started off being an accountant for produce, right, working out on a ship dock. He didn't have anywhere near the massive fortune that he was able to pull together. He said, that was easy how I made it. He says, when the masses bought, I sold. When the masses sold, I bought. Right? There's being counter-cyclical is important. But to do that, you have to think through what's really happening. Interest rates are going up. If you're selling homes, that's going to be difficult. In fact, if you have a huge inventory of homes, you might start coming up with a different plan, like renting the set of homes that you have as inventory. If you're a psychologist or if you're in medicine, we now have $7,000 deductibles in medicine. That means that for the most part, customers are financing their own way. That's just a reality. And if you ignore that reality, you may find in 5, 6, 7 months, you're out of business because you weren't doing what you needed to do on your receivables or your collectibles. The point that I'm making is that while on one hand, we need to see it as it is, and we need to start with a recognition that we're in a really good place, we also have to be realistic about where we are and the effects that that's going to have on us, and how do we adjust to surf that wave?
Yeah, one example that came up for me recently that was a really challenging situation is I had a therapy client who is quite suicidal and a danger to herself and others. And I was talking with the family about my concerns and saying, this person is really unstable and needs to be hospitalized. And everyone on board, including the clinical team, felt that was the wrong move to make, that would further destabilize her, and that she was well managed, and they believe she was stable where she was at. And in fact, they increased some of the buffers in a place that she was living. And I said, that's all well and good, but it's not enough. And these are the reasons why. And this is, what came up in my clinical sessions and my assessment. And these are the reasons why I think that this person really needs to be hospitalized. And so I amped it up, and the family and the clinical team was really upset with me and turned me into the villain in this situation because they saw that this was unnecessary. It was an unnecessary move because I was threatening to petition this client if they didn't become hospitalized voluntarily. That's how much of a risk I saw them to themselves and others. So in talking with the family, I really was honest with what I was seeing. These are the risk factors. And their view on it was really one of catastrophizing. If this person becomes hospitalized, it is my fault that all these other things are then going to happen. And without going into all the details, I realized what was happening in their minds at the moment and the catastrophizing, and it was a very emotionally provocative situation, and they felt very much against what I was urging them to do. And there was a sense of urgency, like this needs to happen tomorrow. And so I really walked them through like, well, okay, I understand that you're seeing this, but this could also happen, and this could also happen, and this could be a benefit. This person's medications could be reevaluated while they're there. This person could actually gain some stabilization and benefit and healing and help through going through this process if it didn't happen. And so all these other things they were refusing to see in that moment. I don't know exactly how they felt about me at the end. I mean, I think I was still the villain in this situation. But, sometimes that's the case. And as you were saying before, like tell the truth, even if it's hard for the others to hear it. And, I was firm about it, but I was also compassionate and kind. And I understood where they were coming from.
Yeah, I really do believe, you should put people before your profit. And that sounds like a cliche, and I guess probably it is. But the reality is, you put yourself at risk where you could lose a client, where you could lose the family. But at the same time, if you're doing what you believe is the right thing, if you're telling the truth, long term, that's going to serve you. Because part of telling the truth is, part of knowing the truth is understanding that you're in this for a long-term gain, not a short-term gain. So let's move to the next step. The next step is be accountable for yourself. This one, I think, is maybe the single most important because it includes making a plan, making certain that you're accountable individually, and also trying to find role models that can help you figure out how to address the subject. Now, I start being accountable with this. First, each of us have good and evil inside of us. I think that we have to always recognize that we have a propensity for having the dark passenger sitting there as well. And I love what my dad used to tell me. He used to say, son, there's an advantage for it being your fault. Because if it's your fault, you can fix it.
Yeah.
So for me, it was always, once you start to recognize that there's so much more power in just taking responsibility for what's going on and then going out and putting together a plan to try to fix it, that it was empowering in my life to recognize that I had the ability to actually make those types of changes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. One of the things that I wanted to highlight about you that came to mind is when we were talking about relationships, and I do see this often, but I think it's worthy of bringing up. When people are thankful or grateful for something that you're doing, and this could be for anyone, take the time to absorb that gratitude for you. And it could be really hard to do. I see it all the time. People are very dismissive. Oh, no problem. Oh, it was, anyone would have done it. And they offer like some kind of dismissive comment because they don't want to be seen as egotistical or for whatever reason. But what you're really doing is you're rejecting that gratitude. And so I really encourage people, when somebody's offering words of praise or words of gratitude for you, really be open to receiving it. And what it's doing is it's really enhancing that connection and that intimacy and that bonding with the other person. So it's not just about you receiving it. That other person feels like they're really giving something of value to the other person. And there's a beautiful reciprocity and exchange that happens in that moment.
Yeah, you're right. I could, I struggle with that.
Yes.
I struggle with it because at the end of the day, I feel like there's this sense if I get gratitude now, it takes away from the fact that I did something that was well or that was good. And so I just kind of want to glaze over it and go to the next thing and help them on whatever else it is that they need help on. But you're right. I can see where you connect better to people if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to be grateful for the thanks that you're being given.
Yeah, and if you tell yourself this might help, you're robbing them of the opportunity to give you something back.
Creating role models, I think, are important in this process. They're important because there are a lot of people who have been very successful during all different types of times, during bad economic periods of times, good economic periods of times, that have been successful in your industry, in your area. Find them. Seek them out. Usually they're older. Usually they're people who have more experience and that have
More
been through
wisdom.
the war. And sometimes the greatest value they can give you isn't how they did really well, but it's how they made mistakes, the things that they wish that they hadn't done. We're not seeing anything really different in this downturn that's potentially going to happen. It hasn't really happened yet. I mean, all the signs today still look very good, but we know that the Feds are raising the interest rates, and that's going to have an effect. As that begins to happen and things begin to slow down, getting advice from people who've been through it can be exceptionally helpful. Now, sometimes that's a psychiatrist, sometimes that's a counselor, sometimes that's a coach, sometimes that's a mentor, sometimes that's just an older person in your family that you know's been through it, and you spend time talking to them about it.
You know, one of the things I say to my clients when they're confronted with abrupt change, like they're about to lose their license, their professional license, and for whatever reason, and they have to rethink their whole career, I say, you know, this could be an opportunity for you. What was the thing that you've always wanted to do, but yet felt trapped because, you know, you've got this education and this license and you just anticipated that you would, you know, ride out this career. We're in a different time. People can have multiple careers in multiple different domains. It doesn't always have to be the same thing. We get to recreate ourselves. And so I say, you know, without worrying or being absorbed in the woe and the self-pity of the loss, feeling like something that you worked really hard for is being taken away from you, see it as an opportunity. Like, you get to do that thing you've always wanted to do, but yet never had the courage to try. What is it? What is that thing? And sometimes it's really profound. Like, you know, I've always thought about having a baby and being a stay-at-home mom. And that was something I really wanted to do. And maybe this is my opportunity to do that. I also hear people saying, you know, I've always wanted to start my own business, but never really had the courage to try. And maybe this was kind of a blessing in disguise. Talking to people who are going through active divorces, I never really realized how much I centered and focused on this other person, even emotionally, like how emotionally draining that was for me and how codependent I was. Actually, it's kind of liberating that I don't have to worry about this other person anymore. I can go to Thanksgiving dinner and not feel that pressure of like, do they want to go now? Or how are they feeling about this conversation? Are they offended by this thing? Do I need to take care of them now?
In our hardest moments, it's oftentimes difficult to understand this, but there are still blessings that are available. You might have to look a little harder to find them, but they're there.
Yeah, and you may not see it in that moment. It might be down the road that you're able to look back on it and then recognize it and see it.
Yep. One of the other issues on accountability is you need to look for resistance. You need to put yourself into positions oftentimes that are a bit adversarial and learn to be able to make certain that you build the story out in your mind so that you can deal with that. Adversity builds resilience, and understanding how that tension is important, avoiding it is not important. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I think cancel culture is so detrimental to the people who are practicing it, or political correctness. They're not really hearing from people who don't think like them. And that means they're not talking to people who don't think like them. So neither side is really benefiting from it. But learning how to have that conversation, you know, what we do is we oftentimes go into, as the book Crucial Conversation said, this silence or violence mode. We either become violent because somebody says something that we didn't like, or we become completely silent. That silence can be just as detrimental. It can be just as harmful to your relationship, and it certainly isn't going to move you in the direction that you want to move in. So learning to have those conversations becomes an important part.
Yeah, and it allows you to really test your cognitions and test what version of your story you're telling yourselves, because when you're really sharing and exposing yourself by not being silent, it allows others to really bring you back to some kind of center and balance. I said like a true psychologist, Paul. Yeah, we grow through adversity. And I was thinking of a quote that I have in my office, you know, courage sometimes isn't that magnificent roar. Sometimes it's that little tiny whisper that says, I'll try again tomorrow. You know?
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And the next one is probably one of the most important, is finding meaning. Finding meaning
Absolutely.
over happiness. And it's really about knowing your purpose. And if you can find your purpose, you can get through really any struggle. In working with refugees, I remember one important story. This was when I was living in Australia. They were people that were packed into this boat and trafficked across the ocean. And the boat had collapsed, and people were fighting for their lives in the middle of the ocean until they can get rescued. And there was a family, and they were telling their children, okay, we're going to play a game now. You have to stay on this floaty device and make sure that none of the water touches you, and you have to make sure that you stay dry. And it's a game that we're going to play. And they made it this brilliant story, and they didn't show fear. They didn't show terror. They didn't show that they were traumatized, and they were strong for their children. And I think, it's a really powerful story to show that, if you have that sense of purpose in whatever struggle you're going through, you can endure almost anyhow if you have that why. Viktor Frankl has a tremendously powerful story of surviving a Holocaust concentration camp as a Jew, and majority of his family members perished and were killed during that time, including his wife and parents and siblings. And he had written a manuscript, and it was about logotherapy. And he said, I'm the only one that knows this manuscript. Nobody else can replicate it. I have to survive this concentration camp in order to ensure that this manuscript gets written. He smuggled a copy of the manuscript into the concentration camp, which of course was taken. And so he knew, I have to survive because this must get out to the world. And he lived under such horrific circumstances, like even just physiologically, you think there's no way that, somebody can endure this with just the devastation physically to the medical conditions and the illnesses they were exposed to, and the harsh winters and the grueling work situations and sleep deprivation, food insecurity, all of those things, and then the physical abuses. But he did because he had the willpower. And if you have the willpower, they can break your bones, but they can never take your will.
Yeah, I love what Viktor Frankl talked about on free will, but I think the thing that oftentimes is so missed when people talk about him is I hear people all the time say, I get it that I need meaning, but I don't even understand what that is. What does that mean? How do I get it? How do I find it? He actually gave us a very clear roadmap. He said, number one, we find meaning from love. Not only who we love, but what we love. All right. He learned to love the sunsets while he was in the concentration camp. He and the soldiers would all want to be outside working during the sunset so they could watch the sun actually go under the horizon. They loved that moment. It was a moment that they felt connection with something bigger. Love is so important in this process, and finding it and being able to give it and to give it away freely, not only to people who are your family and your friends, but sometimes to people you don't even know, which can be anything from your customers to people who think differently than you can. You can give love in a greater way than you believe. The second one is what you create. Right? What it is that you create is one of the ways that you find meaning. And there are so many different things that you can create. You can create art, paintings, sculpture. You can create pottery. You can create a company, a business. You can also create a child. You can raise the child. There's so many things that you create that you can have that can have a huge impact on giving you a sense of meaning in your life. And the last one was struggle. And you don't actually find it by going out and looking for struggle, but by recognizing that it's always going to exist, that struggle is a part of life, and that through that struggle, you begin to figure yourself out in a way in which you would have never figured out through any other process. So there's an advantage even to loss and struggle that happens to us, because we begin to find, or we can begin to find, what our true sense of meaning is. Why are we even here?
Well, let me ask you this question, since we're being even more revealing of ourselves
I think
personally.
we've gone far enough on that.
Oh, wait, one more. Always just a little further. What is your meaning and purpose? How do you define that?
So I think there's meaning in what I create, right? My healthcare company, I feel very proud of it. I'm working with my partners, David Berg and Janice Johnston, as well as a whole group of employees, where we've provided this platform around the country to help employers provide healthcare. And we've created a product that helps people that are the low-wage employees as well as the upper-income employees.
People who would have fallen through the gaps.
And it's a sense of purpose. It's fun to see the people who are in the company who buy into the purpose, who buy into the cause. In fact, they're a little bit cult-like, right? They want to do good for people, and it's just fun to be engaged with people who think that way. This podcast is something that we create. You know, we're past our hour now. We've been noticed a couple of times by our good friend Darby, who's the editor, that we're past our hour. But to me, this is about them, and I don't want to cut this short when we're trying to give information that maybe can be helpful to some people. You know, I was asked a question early on: do I want a podcast that reaches millions of people, or that maybe only pay a little bit of attention to it, or would I really rather have a really strong following, even if it was only in the couple of hundreds?
Yeah, if it was helpful and meaningful and effective.
If it's meaningful and helpful to 10 people, then it was valuable and worthwhile for me to do.
I agree.
It's a way to try to expand what I've been able to do in mentoring. It's a way to be able to expand what I've done in foreign policy and in politics, and trying to help share some of the knowledge from that. And then also bringing on other people who have differing skill sets, like yourself in psychology, always with the thought of, how are we helping the people who are watching? Why does this matter to them? I can tell you the thing that in meaning that I sometimes miss, which I know you will know better than most. I get so tied up sometimes in what I'm creating that I forget about what's the most important, right? Who I love and who loves me.
That's the ambition and the drive.
And it's just there, right? And I'll go in and I'll work on it and I'll cure it and I'll pull myself back a little bit, and then I'm just drawn back to the creation side.
Yes.
But you know, there's no greater joy than having my little girl who will crawl up in my arm and fall asleep, right? Or, you know, pull up the cover next to me to have me read her a book.
Or smash you in the face.
Or smashing me in the face with the phone, as she did the other night. You know, my grandchildren, being able to take them up to the cabin, taking them fishing, spending time with my sons, watching them as they're getting older, being able to grow their own businesses, spending time with my elderly mom and dad, and just being grateful that they're still here and that they can spend time with me. Being grateful for having you. All right. I know that's my weakness. That's my kryptonite, right? And my dad said this to me a long time ago when I was in my 20s, even more ambitious than I am now. And he said, he said, in the end, they're not going to miss you. In the end, you're going to miss them, right? It's really easy to get a long ways down in your life and to forget the things that were the most important. The only way I can do it, as you know, is I got to put it on my schedule.
Yes.
If I put it on my schedule and I say, no, it becomes like another deal. I got to make this deal work, and to make this deal work, I have to spend time on it. I have to make certain that it's in my calendar.
Yeah, and having that balance is important. I think for me, the meaning is maybe more simplified. It's really in preserving humanity. I really feel a strong calling for me in that. And for me, it's about protecting the Garden of Eden, including the snake, including the villain. You know, that we're all different shapes and forms and facets of humanity, and that we're all here for a reason.
Yeah, and that kind of draws us to the purpose of this show, which is to help people regain their sense of agency. Part of why we deal with problems like what's going on in China is to make certain that as Americans that they hear another side of it, which is, yeah, there are big problems with authoritarian governments around the world, and be really grateful you live here.
I am
I am
indeed.
too.
Yeah, just knowing my parents' struggles and being a persecuted minority in Iraq and under the regime of the Ba'ath Party, I know what that alternative is, and it's horrific. There's a lot that we have here, and just the freedoms and the free speech and all the opportunities.
Now, the last one, this is oftentimes overlooked, which is we, not me. You know, I was reading about a very rich CEO the other day who made a comment. I was stunned by it. I actually couldn't believe that he had said it, so I went and looked it back up. And I'm not going to mention his name because I'm not out here to hurt anyone. But his comment was that democracy and freedom are no longer compatible. Now, I'm not certain what happened. Maybe somebody gave him grief over his yacht pulling into a city-owned slip. But whatever it was had them upset, and they believed that somehow or another the rest of us were denying them some freedoms that they needed. I am a firm believer in the free markets, and I'm a firm believer in individualism. I mean, you know, I am radically committed to that. But that only works in a process where we can have free elections. That only works in a process where we recognize that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we've been given incredible gifts here. The thing that we can do is, one, respect that, but two, recognize you're part of something bigger, that there are other people out there who need help and who need assistance, and that you can find an incredible joy in life by standing up when it's important, by being willing to be there when people need you. You know, I see it all the time. There's all these great opportunities to do great things to help people, and people miss the moment to be the hero. They miss the moment to be able to help other people out.
Dr. Philip Zimbardo talks about that, actually. You know, he was the one who conducted the Stanford prison experiments. He went on later in his life to really look at opportunities to become a hero, and seeing that when there are certain situations that happen in your environment, do not look to the other person to be the hero in that situation. Like, you may be the only one in that moment to do that right thing that is needed. And it really reminds me of a true story. When you were at a gym, and there was a conversation that was happening about different political candidates, and there were basically rivals, and the conversation was getting more and more heated. It was between a woman and a man. And you had saw that this conversation was escalating more and more and more. It was starting to get more aggressive in tone. And so I remember you telling me that you had intervened, and you started to try and calm them down. And correct me if I'm wrong, this is coming from memory. And so the woman was leaving the gym. She didn't quite feel safe to walk out to her car. And you had offered to walk her to her car to ensure that she would be safe to do so. And at that moment, the man went out to his car and got a gun from his car and was walking towards her and you. Now you're outside of the gym and you're in the parking lot. So, you know, a more vulnerable place for something like a homicide to happen. And that guy was really aggressive. And you went up to him, you told the woman to go back, and you approached the man with a gun, which, you know, it's a terrifying thing for me to think if anything happened to you, and a heroic thing and courageous thing, but also not something we're advocating for other people. But you approached the man with a gun to talk him down. And you said, hey, man, you don't want to do this today. Like, you don't want your day to end up this way. Like, trust me. I don't know what's going on for you, but whatever it is, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. You didn't tell him he was wrong. You didn't get in his face. You didn't amplify or accelerate the situation, or make him more aggressive. It wasn't about who's going to be the alpha male in that situation, which oftentimes I see these things escalate because of that, because it's like, oh, no, I'm going to dominate this aggressor. You didn't try and dominate him. You tried to pacify the situation. And he agreed. Yeah. Like his day could have ended very, very badly. I don't know what his intention was, if he wanted to just scare her or if he was willing enough to kill her.
I think he was actually angry at the guy who in the gym had told him to leave.
Oh, he got kicked out. Okay, yeah, I missed that part.
No, that's okay. I mean, I don't know exactly why I did that other than I didn't feel like I had any other choice.
You negotiated with him and he gave you his gun in the end. And you said, I'm going to hold on to this for you because I don't think it's safe for you to have this right now. I mean, imagine the trust that he had for another complete stranger, you, to give you the gun that he had.
Yeah, it's here's what I can tell you. We get things way out of sorts sometimes, especially in our politics. Right? We fail to recognize, and this will be the subject of another discussion, we fail to recognize the benefit that people who think differently than us bring to the table. I don't think that what's wrong with the United States is we're too divided. I think being divided is something that's necessary. I mean, look back in history and think about Jefferson and Hamilton and say, okay, these two guys were really divided. One gave us the Bill of Rights. The other one gave us Wall Street and the Treasury and a whole set of other things. Which one don't you want? Because they didn't agree with one another. Their divisions made us better and made us stronger. There aren't divisions in China. Take a look. There aren't divisions in Russia. They don't exist. Because if they do, they're dead.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
They're annihilated.
You agree with the authoritarian or not. And that means the authoritarian is making decisions in a bubble. That's what happened with Vladimir Putin. That's why he's in the middle of the Ukraine. He was in a bubble without other people being able to say, don't do this. This is a mistake. Right? That's our danger from them. Here at home, we're allowing these things to get out of control. And instead of going to the gym and working out with weights, you're in a political argument. That's not why I go to the gym, right? I mean, if somebody wants to talk politics, I do. But if I find that I'm upsetting them, I stop.
Well, it was an amazing situation. And, you prevented something from escalating that could have been a really horrific homicidal situation.
Yeah, maybe.
Who knows how far he would have been willing to go to prove his point.
And again, here's the thing. We belong to something bigger. We belong to something bigger. And when we recognize that and we recognize that we have these moments where if we want to be helpful to other people, we can. And it doesn't have to be something that big. That example is probably not a great example for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, and again, we're not advocating that people run into the middle of a fist fight.
But sometimes it's just opening a door for someone. Sometimes it's when the other person says something politically that you don't like, instead of arguing with them, saying, hey, help me understand that better. I don't really understand why you believe that. What is it that's driving this? Where did you hear that information? Sometimes give them your opinion if they ask, but I oftentimes make people ask twice. I say, well, do you really want my opinion? I don't think it's the same as yours, and I'm okay with just listening to yours. It's amazing how once I say that, people actually will listen to my opinion.
Yeah.
But if they say no,
because you're not pushy
that made
about
it easy, right? Try and think about the other people that are there and what it is that you can do for them. Again, I hear my colleagues all the time say, I made it on my own. And here's my answer. Horse manure. None of us made it on our own. We all made it from the help of our teachers, our friends, our family members, from our mentors,
our enemies,
from our enemies, from other business people who helped. If you go back and you look at innovation, what you find with innovation is you can say, well, so-and-so invented this. And then you go, well, wait a minute. This guy invented this right before him, and then this guy invented this before him, and then this guy invented that before him. And he really was the accumulation of 10 other people. It's innovation. Certainly he was innovative. I don't want to take away from it. In this country, again, the fact that we have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of property rights, all guaranteed by the Constitution, freedom of patents, the ability to be able to own what it is that you create. Those are all things that were built into our system. Now, it is possible that maybe there's some smart billionaire who thinks that if we did away with the democratic system, that possibly they'd be the one that was in charge. But in my experience, watching a lot of history, they're the first one that gets a bullet in their head because the tyrant begins to understand that they're the ones that will stand up to them, and they don't want people to stand up to them. We've created this from the sweat of a lot of people, and it's not perfect. And I definitely am a big believer that we have these two extremes that are becoming damaging not only to the system, but they're becoming damaging to individuals. They're creating this ideological curve that people are getting stuck on, these, as our book says, these addictive ideologies that are damaging to the country and are damaging to individuals. But it's your choice. You choose. And you can choose to buy into the Enlightenment, that things are going to get better, or you can buy into the dark Enlightenment that says that rationality and science are all really part of some giant conspiracy theory, and what we really need is to be more pessimistic because we have all these leaders who are trying to screw us.
I can't imagine that would lead someone to having a happier or like a more meaningful existence.
I can tell you this. I find very, very few successful people who have that theory. Very, very few. But with that, we've gone way past our time. Emily, thank you. I appreciate you being on the show today. And we'll
this was
see you
a
on
fun
the next
one.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned, and we can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.